The first lie I told my stepchildren was that their father was coming back. The second lie was that Booth 7 at Maple Root Diner was just our favorite place for late-night pancakes. It was almost midnight, raining hard enough to turn the parking lot lights into blurry yellow circles on the windows, and I was sitting across from two children who were not mine by blood, but had somehow become the only reason I was still holding myself together.
Ethan was 12. He sat on the outside edge of the booth with his backpack wedged between his sneakers, one hand resting on the straps someone might try to take it from him. He had been doing that for 3 nights, not sleeping, not relaxing, not asking the questions I knew were building behind his eyes. He was too young to look that guarded, and too smart not to understand that something was very wrong.
Rosie was 8. She had fallen asleep with her cheek pressed against my folded jacket, her old cloth doll tucked under one arm. There was syrup on her sleeve and a pink toothbrush in the side pocket of her backpack because I had told her brushing your teeth in a diner bathroom could be part of an adventure if you used enough imagination. That was the thing about children. They would believe you for a while if your voice stayed steady. But only for a while.
On the table between us was one plate of pancakes, cut into pieces small enough to look like more food than it was. I had ordered one side of scrambled eggs and 3 waters. I told Ethan I was not hungry. He looked at me the way children look at adults when they know the truth, but understand that saying it out loud would make everything worse.
His father, Mark, had been gone for 6 days. 6 days since I found the note on the kitchen counter that said, "I need a little time, don't call my mom, I'll fix this." 6 days since I opened the drawer and found the final rent notice he told me he had handled. 6 days since the landlord changed the locks and gave me 15 minutes to collect school shoes, medicine, homework folders, Rosie's doll, and whatever pieces of our life would fit into the back seat of my old car. I was not Ethan and Rosie's legal mother. I was their stepmother. That word had followed me around for 4 years like a warning label. Stepmom. Not real mom. Not family, not exactly. Close enough to pack lunches, wash uniforms, sign reading logs, remember allergy medicine, sit through parent-teacher conferences, and hold a feverish child at 2 a.m. But not close enough, apparently, to be trusted when everything fell apart. That was the part I could not explain to anyone. I was not only afraid of being broke, I was not only afraid of sleeping in the car behind the diner after the booths emptied out. I was not only afraid of Ethan pretending he was fine or Rosie asking when we were going home. I was afraid that if I asked for help the wrong way, someone would ask the one question I could not survive. "Are you their real mother?" And if I answered honestly, if I said no, I was terrified that no one would hear the rest. No, I did not give birth to them. No, my name was not on their birth certificates. No, I did not have a perfect folder of legal papers proving what bedtime stories and lunch money and clean socks and emergency contact forms already knew. But I was the one who stayed. I was the one Ethan handed his school forms to when Mark forgot. I was the one Rosie reached for after nightmares. I was the one who knew Ethan hated bananas when they had brown spots, and Rosie could not sleep unless the closet door was shut all the way. I was the one sitting in booth 7 at 11:58 p.m., counting quarters under the table and trying to decide whether I had enough money for breakfast before school. The waitress came over then. Her name was Joanne. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair pinned at the back of her head and the tired eyes of someone who had carried too many coffee pots through too many midnight shifts. She had served us before, but that night she did not ask if we wanted anything else. She just placed the check face down beside my hand. I waited until she walked away before I turned it over. The total was $0. No pancakes, no eggs, no coffee refill, no tax, no tip line. Just a blank receipt with one sentence written across the bottom in blue pen. I know what sleeping sitting up looks like. For a moment, I could not breathe. Ethan saw my face change and sat up straighter. Rosie stirred against my jacket. The rain kept tapping against the glass like fingers asking to be let in. I looked toward the counter. Joanne was standing near the coffee station, not smiling, not pitying me, not making a scene. She simply looked at me like a woman who had recognized a fire because she had once stood in the smoke herself. I should have looked away. I should have gathered the kids, thanked her politely, and left before anyone could ask questions I was not ready to answer. Instead, I folded the receipt once, then twice, and held it in my shaking hand. Because for the first time in 6 nights, someone had looked at us and not asked where their real mother was. She asked how long we had been sitting there with nowhere else to go. Every morning in that house began with the same small sounds.
The coffee maker coughing on the counter, the old furnace clicking in the hallway, Rosie's sock feet sliding across the kitchen floor before she was fully awake, Ethan's bedroom door opening with the careful quiet of a boy who had learned not to expect much from grown men before breakfast.
I used to tell myself we were a normal family with a few rough edges. That was easier than admitting the truth.
The truth was that I knew exactly how Ethan liked his lunch packed, but I still hesitated before signing my name on his school forms. I knew Rosie needed the crust cut off her sandwich and the closet door shut at night, but I still froze whenever someone at school asked, "Are you Mom?"
I was the woman who did the work of a mother and carried the title of something less. Stepmom. Some people said it gently, some said it like a correction.
That Tuesday, I woke before the alarm. Mark was asleep on the living room couch again, his phone face down on his chest. There was an unopened envelope on the coffee table, the kind with a red strip across the top. I noticed it, then looked away.
I had gotten good at looking away.
In the kitchen, I packed Ethan's turkey sandwich without mustard because he hated mustard. I put apple slices in a plastic bag because he would not eat bananas once they got brown spots. For Rosie, I packed crackers, grapes, and the tiny container of ranch dressing she believed made carrots less suspicious.
When Rosie wandered in, she leaned against my hip and mumbled, "Morning, Mom." Then she went still. "I mean Claire." I smiled like it had not touched the softest place in me. Claire works. Ethan came in already dressed, already guarded. He put a folded field trip form beside my coffee mug. "Dad said he'd sign it," I asked. Ethan did not look toward the living room. He'll forget.
I picked up the form, parent or guardian signature. The words sat there in black ink, simple for everyone except me. I signed Claire Whitman, then slid it back to him.
He took it without thanking me, but he put it carefully in his binder. That was Ethan's version of trust. Mark woke up when I was zipping Rosie's coat. He rubbed his face and looked around like the morning had inconvenienced him. "I can take them," he said. Rosie brightened. "Really?" Mark reached for his phone, frowned, and stood. "Actually, I've got a call. Job thing." The light went out of Rosie's face so fast I wanted to cover it with my hand. "It's fine," I said. "I'm already going that way." Mark gave me a grateful look, the kind that cost him nothing. "You're a lifesaver." He said that often, usually right before letting me carry something heavy. On the drive to school, Rosie talked about a spelling test. Ethan watched the houses pass. I could feel him checking my face in the window reflection, reading for things I had not said. At drop-off, a new office aide stopped me. "Are you their mother?" There it was again. Ethan shifted beside me, Rosie pressed closer to my coat. "Stepmother," I said. "I'm on the pickup list." The aide looked down at the clipboard longer than she needed to. Not rudely, just long enough to remind me that my place in their lives had to be verified. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, you're good." I smiled because that was what women like me did when being allowed to care for children we already cared for. At work, I balanced invoices at Donnelly's garage and tried not to think about the envelope. Mark had said he handled the rent. He had also said he would call the dentist, fix the kitchen sink, and stop borrowing from his mother. By 3 o'clock, he had not answered any of my texts. That evening, I found the envelope in the kitchen drawer. Final notice, 2 months behind, 7 days to pay. My hands went cold. Behind me, Rosie laughed at something on TV. Ethan asked where the tape was for his science poster. Mark's shoes were gone, but his jacket was still on the chair, as if he wanted the house to believe he was coming back soon. I folded the notice and put it back in the drawer. Not because I did not understand what it meant. Because Ethan had a poster due Friday. Rosie needed her hair washed, and I did not yet know how to tell 2 children that the person with the legal right to keep them safe had left the unpaid bill to the woman everyone kept calling almost family. The first thing I did after finding the notice was make dinner. That sounds ridiculous now, but at the time it felt like the only piece of the evening I still controlled. I browned ground turkey in a skillet, boiled pasta, and told Rosie to set out 3 plates instead of 4.
"Dad's not eating?" she asked.
"We had something to take care of," I said.
Ethan looked up from his science poster. He did not ask what. He just pressed the tape down harder than he needed to, smoothing one corner until the paper wrinkled.
That was the first moment I understood. This was not a rough week. It was a pattern I had been helping Mark hide.
The second moment came when I opened the drawer after the kids went to bed. Behind the rent notice were 2 older envelopes, one from the electric company, one from the landlord dated 3 weeks earlier. Both opened, both folded neatly, both buried under takeout menus.
Mark had not forgotten. He had organized the evidence of his forgetting.
I stood there with the drawer open and thought about all the times he had said, "I handled it." The dentist bill, the car insurance, Rosie's field trip payment. Each time I had believed him for a few days, then quietly fixed what I could when the reminder came back red.
I used to call that teamwork. That night, I finally called it what it was. I was catching plates he kept dropping, and he had learned to stop warning me before he let go.
The next morning, Mark came home just after 6. His hair was damp from rain, and his eyes had that restless shine he got when he wanted to look busy enough that no one could ask him anything.
"Where were you?" I whispered. He glanced toward the hallway. "Don't start."
7 days, Mark. I said I'm handling it.
"You said that 2 months ago." His face tightened, not with guilt exactly, but with irritation that I had used numbers. Before I could say more, Ethan stepped into the hallway with his backpack already on. He had heard enough to pretend he had heard nothing. Mark smiled too quickly. "Hey, buddy." Ethan looked at him, then at me. "Claire's driving us, right?" Mark's smile faded. In the car, Rosie hummed along to the radio. Ethan stayed quiet until we reached the school drop-off line. Then he said, "Dad didn't pay the rent, did he?" My hands tightened on the wheel. The lie was already waiting. Instead, I said, "I'm working on it." Ethan nodded like a grown man hearing bad news from a bank. "Okay. Just okay." That hurt worse than panic would have. Panic would have meant he was still a child. Okay meant he had been preparing for this. At work, I went through old emails between invoices. There were school reminders Mark had ignored, a message from Patricia asking why Claire was making decisions again, and one email from Ethan's teacher thanking me for responding so quickly when Ethan had a panic episode after lunch. I remembered that day. Mark had promised to go, then his phone went off, then the school called me. At the time, I thought emergency simply found me first. Now I saw the pattern. When something required love, Mark accepted the credit. When something required follow-through, my phone rang. By the 3rd night, Mark had stopped coming home before the kids were asleep. He sent short texts. "Working on it, need time, don't call my mom." That last one told me everything. He was not afraid Patricia would fail the kids. He was afraid she would take them from the mess he made and erase me while cleaning it up. On Thursday, Rosie found me sorting clothes into backpacks. "Are we going somewhere?" "Maybe just for a night," I said, "like an adventure." Ethan stood in the doorway behind her. His eyes moved from the backpacks to the folded blankets to the medicine bottle I had tucked into the front pocket. He knew. He always knew. That evening, the lock on the front door stuck when I turned the key. For 1 second, I thought it was just the old door swelling from the rain. Then I saw the metal plate. A plastic bag sat on the porch with Rosie's doll inside. Ethan picked up the bag before Rosie could see what was in it. Rosie asked, "Why is our stuff outside?" I looked at the locked door, then at the children Mark had left behind, and understood the worst part was not that we had nowhere to sleep. The worst part was that I had been acting like this was an accident when the road had been marked for miles. I expected Joanne to ask for the whole story. Instead, she slid a clean guest check across the counter and handed me a pen. "Start with what you know," she said. I stared at the blank paper like it was a test I had already failed. Behind me, Rosie was asleep in booth 7 with her doll tucked under her chin. Ethan sat beside her, pretending not to listen. He had one hand on his backpack again, but his eyes were fixed on Joanne. "I don't know anything," I said quietly. "I know we can't go home. I know Mark won't answer. I know his mother will say I have no right to keep them." Joanne nodded once, not surprised. "Then we write down what proves you've been the one keeping them." That sentence landed in a place I did not know was still waiting to be reached.
Not what proves I loved them. What proves I had been there. Because love, I was learning, could be dismissed by people who did not want to see it, but records were harder to erase.
Joanne turned the guest check over and drew a line down the middle. Dates on one side, she said, proof on the other.
I almost laughed because it felt too small. A diner receipt, a blue pen, and a waitress who smelled like coffee and fryer oil. That was not the kind of rescue people imagine when everything collapses.
But it was the first useful thing anyone had offered me.
I wrote the date Mark left, then the date the lock changed, then the day Ethan's school called me during his panic episode because Mark did not answer, the day Rosie's teacher emailed me about her reading folder, the day I paid the lunch account, the day I picked up the allergy medicine.
Once I started, I could not stop.
It was not one big moment. It was hundreds of small ones. Teacher emails, pharmacy receipts, field trip forms, texts from Mark saying, "Can you handle pickup?" And "Tell Rosie I'll call tomorrow." Tomorrow had become his favorite place to hide.
Ethan slid out of the booth before I heard him move. "You're making a case?" he asked. His voice was low, almost angry. I looked at him. "I'm making a record."
Of us.
"No," I said, "of me not disappearing." His face changed then, not much. Ethan never gave away too much at once, but something in his jaw loosened. Joanne looked at him gently. Sometimes adults need paper to prove what kids already know. He did not answer, but he reached into his backpack and pulled out a wrinkled folder. "I kept these because Dad loses stuff," he said.
Inside were papers I did not know he had saved, a field trip form I had signed, a note from his teacher thanking me for coming in after school, a receipt from the pharmacy with Rosie's name printed across the top, a lunch account notice with my handwriting on it.
I had to look away for a second. Not because the papers fixed anything. Because my 12-year-old stepson had been collecting evidence that I was his safe adult before I knew I would need it. Joanne did not let me fall apart. That was one of the kindest things she did. She pointed to the folder. "Good, keep that together. Tonight, you need somewhere safe. Tomorrow, you need advice from someone who knows the system." "I can't call family services," I said too fast. "I didn't say call them alone," Joanne said. "I said get advice." She wrote down the name of a family legal aid clinic 2 towns over and a community housing intake office connected to a local church group. Not a miracle, not a promise, just 2 places that might answer the phone. Then she looked at me. "And Mark?" My first thought was anger, real anger, the kind that makes you want to send every message, every bill, every red notice to everyone who ever called him a good father. But anger would not give the kids a bed. So I opened my phone and typed one message. "Mark, I need written confirmation that Ethan and Rosie are staying with me tonight and that you know they are safe. If you want other arrangements, you need to respond clearly." I did not insult him. I did not beg, did not threaten. I sent it, then wrote the time in Joanne's guest check. At 12:41 a.m., his reply came. "Keep them with you. Don't call my mom. I'll fix it soon." Joanne read it and said, "That goes in the folder." Ethan read it too, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "He's not coming, is he?" he asked. I wanted to protect him from the answer. Instead, I gave him the truth I could safely give. "Not tonight." Rosie stirred in the booth and whispered my name in her sleep. "Not Mom." "Not yet." "Just Claire." But Ethan picked up his backpack, put the folder inside, and handed it to me. "You should hold it," he said. That was not forgiveness. It was not trust all the way. But it was the first time he let me carry something he had been carrying alone.
And that night, under the buzzing diner lights, I understood our way out would not be loud. It would be slow, it would be written down, it would be one record, one boundary, one honest conversation at a time. 30 days later, we were not saved.
That is important to say. We were safer. We were warmer. We had a temporary room through the community housing program, 2 narrow beds, 1 dresser with a drawer that stuck, and a shared kitchen at the end of the hall. But there was no magical ending waiting for us just because Joanne had seen the truth in booth 7. Mark did not come back with flowers. Patricia did not stand in a room and apologize for every time she had called me almost family. No judge banged a gavel and declared that love was enough.
Real life moves slower than that.
Every Tuesday afternoon, I met with Ms. Bell at the legal aid office. She helped me sort the folder Ethan had started, and Joanne had taught me to protect. School pickup forms, pharmacy receipts, teacher emails, Mark's text saying the kids were safe with me, notes from the housing intake worker, dates, times, names, copies.
None of it made me their mother on paper overnight.
But it made one thing harder to deny.
I had been there.
Mark finally answered a scheduled call in the second week. His voice sounded tired, small, and defensive all at once.
I didn't mean for it to get this bad, he said.
I waited for the old version of myself to protect him, the version who would soften his failure before the children could feel it, the version who would say, "Your dad is trying," even when trying had become another word for leaving.
But that woman had slept in a diner booth long enough. I'm not explaining this away for you anymore, I said. If you want to be part of their lives, you need a plan, not a promise.
He did not beg. He did not change in one phone call. He said he needed time, and for once, I did not give him mine.
Patricia came to the temporary housing office on a gray Thursday morning. She wore a wool coat and the tight expression of a woman who wanted to call herself concerned without admitting she had been wrong.
You should have called family, she said. I looked at her for a long moment.
I did, I said. I called their father. She looked away first.
There was no big apology, no tears, no hug, but before she left, she handed me an envelope. Inside were copies of Rosie's insurance card, Ethan's birth certificate, and the pediatrician's number written on a sticky note.
You'll probably need these, she said. That was all. But sometimes in families like ours, all is not small.
Ethan changed slowly too. He still did not call me Mom. He still sat with his back near the wall in unfamiliar rooms. But he stopped sleeping with his backpack under his arm. One night, I found it on the floor across the room, unzipped, homework spilling out like he finally trusted the world not to steal everything while he slept.
Rosie started asking about our next place, not the old house, not Mark, the next place.
When we get a kitchen, she said one morning, can I pick the color of the dish towels? I told her yes. She smiled like dish towels were proof of a future. The day that broke me open came from a field trip form.
Ethan placed it on the little desk in our room. Parent or guardian signature. I had seen those words 100 times, and every time they had made me feel like I was standing outside a locked door.
This time, Ethan had written my name lightly in pencil above the line. Claire Whitman.
I looked at him.
He shrugged, staring at the floor. They said, parent or guardian, you're the one who shows up.
I signed it with a hand that did not shake. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I went back to Maple Root Diner. Joanne was wiping down the counter, the same way she had that night. Booth 7 was empty. I gave her an envelope with some cash inside, not everything I owed, not even close, but something. She counted it, took half, and pushed the rest back.
You'll need groceries, she said. I don't want to owe you forever.
You don't, she said. Just notice the next person sitting too still.
2 weeks later, I did.
A young mother in the housing office was staring at a stack of school lunch forms, like they were written in another language. When the intake worker asked if she needed help, she said, "I'm fine." I knew that word. I sat beside her and placed my folder on the table. I didn't ask if you were fine, I said. I asked which form is scaring you first. For a long time, I thought being a stepmother meant waiting at the edge of a family, hoping someone would invite me in. But Booth 7 taught me something different.
Family is not always the person with the first claim. Sometimes family is the person who stays long enough to be counted.